Here's a brutal reality check that college football fans need to face. Some programs that looked promising just weeks ago are now staring down the barrel of complete organizational meltdown. Week 2 of college football delivered some of the most shocking upsets and embarrassing performances we've seen in recent memory. While every season has its share of surprises, what we witnessed this past weekend goes beyond typical growing pains or unlucky breaks. We're talking about fundamental breakdowns that could signal the beginning of the end for several programs that were supposed to compete at the highest level. But here's where it gets controversial. These aren't just bad losses. They're the kind of defeats that expose deep-rooted systemic problems that might be impossible to fix mid-season. Florida Gators, when being ranked, means nothing. Let's start with perhaps the most stunning collapse of all. The Florida Gators, sitting pretty at number 113 in the national rankings, didn't just lose to the South Florida Bulls. They got thoroughly outplayed by a program that most analysts didn't even consider a legitimate threat. Sure, USF had already knocked off a previously ranked Boise State team, but that should have served as a warning rather than an excuse for Florida's preparation. Here's the terrifying truth for Gator fans. This loss might actually be the least of their worries. When you examine Florida's remaining schedule, it reads like a murderer's row of college football powerhouses. 9 of their final 11 opponents currently hold spots in the top 25 rankings, with 4 of those teams positioned in the elite top 7. That's not just challenging. That's potentially season-ending. But here's what most people are missing. Florida's schedule strength, which was supposed to be an advantage for playoff consideration, has now become their biggest nightmare. Every upcoming game represents another opportunity for humiliation. And with confidence already shattered after the USF debacle, the Gators could be looking at a catastrophic slide that makes bowl eligibility seem like a pipe dream. And this is the part that should make Florida fans really nervous. Head coach Billy Napier's seat just went from warm to scorching hot. In the cutthroat world of SEC football, there's zero tolerance for embarrassing home losses to unranked opponents, especially when you're supposed to be building momentum for a championship run. Oklahoma State Cowboys, from promising to pathetic in record time. Remember last season when Oklahoma State started 3-0 and looked like they belonged in the top 10? That feels like ancient history now, especially after what we witnessed this past weekend. The Cowboys didn't just lose to Montana State. They got absolutely obliterated in a 69-3 massacre that will go down as one of the most humiliating defeats in program history. Let's put this in perspective. Montana State scored 69 points against a Power 5 program. 69 points. That's not just bad defense. That's a complete and total systemic breakdown on every level imaginable. When an FCS program can put up video game numbers against your supposedly elite team, you're not dealing with a few missed tackles or blown coverages. You're looking at fundamental problems that run much deeper than X's and O's. Here's the controversial take that nobody wants to admit. Oklahoma State might actually be worse now than they were during their disastrous 3-9 season last year. At least then, they had the excuse of injuries and bad luck. This year, they're getting demolished by teams that shouldn't even be competitive against a decent high school squad. But wait, it gets worse. The Cowboys still have to navigate a Big 12 schedule that includes several ranked opponents who are probably licking their chops at the opportunity to run up the score against a defenseless Oklahoma State team. Bowl eligibility isn't just unlikely at this point. It's bordering on impossible unless something dramatic changes immediately. Kansas State Wildcats. When everything falls apart simultaneously, the Kansas State situation might be the most puzzling of all 3 disasters. After suffering a respectable loss to ranked Iowa State, the kind of defeat that doesn't necessarily derail a season, the Wildcats had a golden opportunity to bounce back against North Dakota. Instead, they barely scraped by with an uninspiring victory that should have served as a massive red flag for anyone paying attention. Then came the Army game, and that's when everything completely unraveled. Now let's be clear about something. Army runs a triple option offense that every defensive coordinator in America knows how to stop. They're predictable, they're limited, and they had already lost to Tarleton State in their season opener. This wasn't Alabama or Georgia we're talking about. This was a service academy team with glaring weaknesses that any competent coaching staff should have been able to exploit. Yet somehow, Kansas State found a way to lose to a team that runs the same play over and over again. That's not just poor preparation. That's a complete failure of coaching, execution, and mental toughness, all rolled into one catastrophic performance. And this is where things get really controversial. Kansas State's problems might be even more serious than Florida's or Oklahoma State's, because they lost to an opponent with such obvious limitations. At least the other two teams lost to programs with legitimate talent and coaching. Kansas State got outplayed by a team that everyone in the stadium knew exactly what they were going to do on every single snap. For Wildcat fans, this season is rapidly turning into a nightmare scenario where every game becomes a potential trap that could lead to another humiliating defeat. When you can't handle Army's predictable offense, how are you supposed to compete against Big 12 opponents with actual offensive creativity and talent? The bigger picture, what these collapses really mean. Here's the harsh reality that college football fans need to understand. These are just isolated bad games that teams can bounce back from with a good week of practice. These are the kind of comprehensive failures that expose fundamental flaws in recruiting, coaching, player development, and organizational culture. When ranked teams lose by 66 points to FCS opponents, when supposedly elite programs can't stop the most basic offensive schemes in football, and when highly touted recruiting classes get embarrassed on national television, we're witnessing something much more serious than typical growing pains. But here's the question that should spark some serious debate. Are we being too harsh on these programs? Or are we actually not being critical enough? In an era where college football has never been more competitive and resources have never been more abundant, should fans and boosters accept these kinds of catastrophic failures? These defeats don't just hurt individual seasons. They can destroy recruiting momentum, shatter player confidence, and create a culture of losing that becomes incredibly difficult to reverse. We've seen it happen to once proud programs across the country, and it's happening right before our eyes with these three teams. So here's my controversial question for you. Which of these three programs do you think has the best chance of turning things around? And more importantly, do any of them deserve the benefit of the doubt after these historically bad performances? Are we witnessing the beginning of the end for multiple coaching careers? Or am I overreacting to what could just be early season growing pains? Let me know in the comments whether you think these teams can salvage their seasons, or if we're watching the complete collapse of programs that were supposed to compete for championships. Because honestly, after what we've seen so far, I'm not sure there's any coming back from this level of embarrassment.